What's going on, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So this is going to be a full push session. This is actually my push B session. I thought it would be cool to kind of get back into posting full sessions on my YouTube channel again, because right now when I'm posting on TikTok or Instagram, you guys are really only seeing a small segment from one set of each workout. So I thought it would be pretty cool to put up a full session so that you guys can see what every working set looks like and what a full training day looks like for me. So as I mentioned, this is my push B session. So I'm starting off here with a single arm low cable row for the lats. And a question that I get asked a lot of times is, why are you starting off your push sessions with lat work? And then why are you starting off your pull sessions with chest work? And the answer is very simple. And to understand it, you guys need to understand how this one training session fits into my training program as a whole. So what do I mean by that? Right now, I am training with a very leg dominant split. So I am training legs push, rest, legs pull, rest, and then I repeat. So that means two things. One, it means that I'm training my lower body twice as frequently as I'm training push and pull. And two, it means that when I hit a push day or a pull day, I go 6 days without hitting those muscles again. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with my training philosophies, but I don't really think there's any scenario in which I would recommend anybody train a muscle and then wait 6 days to hit it again. So that's part of the reason why we keep the volume low per exercise, is so that I can do a workout, stimulate hypertrophy, and then because the volume is so much lower, I can recover from that workout quicker and then do another workout for that same muscle group. And what that looks like is over the course of a year, I'm typically training everything 2 times a week. So that's really the main reason why I am doing some lat work before push days, is because if I don't do that, I am only hitting my lats on pull days, and then I am going 6 days without hitting them again. And I just don't think that that is optimal. The next most popular question that I get when I post push days is, why are you doing 2 pec decs in the same session? So the main reason why I'm doing 2 pec decs in both of my push sessions is because both of these pec decs are different resistance profiles and have a different strength curve to them. What do I mean by that? The particular pec dec that you're watching me do right now is a hammer strength model. All hammer strength machines are going to overload the shortened position. What does that mean? It means that as the muscle gets shorter, as it comes into full contraction, peak contraction, the weight gets heavier. So why would I do an exercise where the weight gets heavier at the beginning of the workout? And the reason for that is, while the muscle is fresh, it is easier to get a peak contraction on the muscle. As a muscle gets more and more fatigued, it gets harder and harder to reach a full contraction. Think about at the end of a leg workout when your quads are pumped and how difficult it is to get full peak contraction on a leg extension. Or as your biceps get more and more pumped as you go through an arm workout, as you get to the end, it gets harder and harder for you to hit peak contraction on that muscle. All muscles are going to operate on those type of rules, I guess you could call them. As they are fresh, they are easier to get shortened, and as they become fatigued, they get more and more difficult to become shortened. And so I choose exercises at the beginning of the workout that challenge the muscle in the shortened position. Because the muscle is fresh, it will be able to complete the peak contraction on each rep. Now, I'll talk about the other pec dec when we get there, but the other one is the complete opposite, and it actually gets easier as I go to lock out, and it gets heavier in the fully stretched position, which is completely advantageous to me as I get towards the end of a workout, because as I mentioned, by that point my pecs are very fatigued and it's harder and harder for me to get a full peak contraction. Now, do you need to do 2 different machines? If you're lucky enough to train in a gym that has prime equipment, you probably don't need to do multiple machines. The prime equipment is something that you can adjust to have different resistance profiles and overload different portions of the range of motion. But as you guys have probably noticed by now, I do not train in a gym that has access to the prime equipment. And so I do prefer to do 2 different pec dec flies just to target different particular ranges of motion for the pecs. After I do one set there, Really focusing on the shortened position, I move into the main press for the day, which is a hammer strength incline. I'm doing 2 working sets here, and I'm trying to work in 2 different rep ranges. So my first set, I'm trying to work in something a little heavier, something in like the 6 to 9 rep range. And then my second set, I'm trying to do something between 10 and 15 reps. Now, you'll notice with my top set of the incline press, I actually maintained performance from the last rotation, and I actually lost a rep on the second set here. So this second set was probably redundant. I probably did not need to do this second set at all. But contrary to what most people would believe, I don't actually consider my performance on the top set to be a failure. The fact that my body weight was about 3.5 pounds lighter on this rotation than it was the last time that I did this session, the fact that I'm able to maintain my pressing performance with less body weight is still considered a win, in my opinion. I know there may be some people that would disagree with that, but as I have noticed when my body weight decreases that my pressing movements are the movements that become the most difficult to progress. So in my eyes, if I can maintain my pressing performance while food is low and drugs are low, when food goes in and drug goes back in, that lift is just going to completely skyrocket. So I don't necessarily get upset about matched performance in push sessions while I'm dieting and or cruising. As we move on from the hammer strength press, we're going to get into the last exercise for the chest here, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the Magnum Pec Dec fly. So this one gets a lot heavier in the lengthened position in the full stretch and then gets easier as I hit a peak contraction. You guys will notice how much time I'm spending in the fully stretched position here. That's just to take advantage of the fact that the weight is overloading in the fully stretched position. I'm really trying to get a full long stretch and completely tax the stretched position of the pecs. And once I finish this off, I've done 4 max effort sets of pecs. The first set focused on the shortened range of motion, the last set on the lengthened range of motion, and my middle 2 sets were all compound work. So realistically, I have probably stimulated hypertrophy with those 4 sets. So there's no need to continue to do any more pec work in the session. From here, I move on to my delt work. I like to do my reverse pec deck and rear delt stuff on push days rather than pull days. It's just a personal preference. I don't think it really matters where you do it. I would just fit it where it makes sense for you. And right now it makes more sense for me to do it on push days. I'm doing 2 sets here on this reverse pec deck fly. The first set, I am spending a considerable amount of time in the shortened position because the rear delt is fresh. It has not been taxed yet. So it is going to be easy for me to get it fully shortened, and I want to spend time with it fully shortened to really maximize that. And then from here, I'm going to work into a second set where I don't pause as much in the peak contraction and I just focus on a more, I would say, traditional style rep tempo. Something that I like to do with all of my muscle groups, but particularly the delts, is kind of vary the exercises that I am using in both of my rotations. So in my other push session, I am doing a rear delt cable row where I'm set up on a cable machine and I'm using a pair of D handles on a cambered bar and I'm training my rear delts that way. On this particular session, I'm using a reverse pec deck, which is kind of like a staple meat and potatoes rear delt movement. If I was really limited in my rear delt exercise selections, I would just stick with the reverse pec deck. But the fact that I have the ability to do 2 different exercises for the same muscle is something that I like to do because it keeps variety within the training program. I'm not doing the same exercises over and over and over again. I am still targeting the same musculature, but I am using different exercises to do that. That gives me some different resistance profiles. It kind of gives me some different loading patterns, different motor pattern, ranges of motion. There are a lot of different benefits to using multiple different exercises for the same movement, and that's just how I prefer to set up my delt training. Not really just my delt training, but everything in general. Speaking of delt training, after the rear delt work is over, we get into the side delt work. So I start off here on the Cybex lateral raise. So this particular lateral raise is very similar to a hammer strength machine in the sense that it overloads the shortened. So that will be why you guys notice that I'm spending so much time at peak contraction, is because this machine gets really, really heavy in the short. So while my side delts are fresh, I want to challenge them. by not only using an exercise that challenges them in the short, but also using a rep tempo that further emphasizes that. So realistically, I can probably only do one set here with the pauses, and that's just kind of how I've been setting it up. I'm doing 2 working sets on this exercise. The first one, I'm using the pauses to take advantage of the shortened range of motion, and then my second set, which you will see here shortly, is again a more traditional rep tempo. In previous rotations within the past like 6 months or a year, I have done more than 2 sets on this exercise, and I just find that because of the resistance profile and how it gets harder and harder to lock out, that really 2 working sets is my max on this exercise before I find that my performance really drops off on the third one and it gets a lot harder, for me to get the muscle short. Another thing that you'll notice while I'm doing these and the lateral raise that follows this is that I'm holding on to a pair of D handles. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I am doing both of these lateral raises hands-free. And so by having something in my hands, I am able to squeeze and grip and activate the irradiation effect, which basically activates all of the muscles in my arm all the way up to my shoulder joint. It creates a lot more stability and produces, or I guess you could say provides, a more stable surface for me to exert force from and get a harder peak contraction. As I mentioned, I can really only do 2 sets on the Cybex lateral raise, but that doesn't mean that I'm only going to do 2 sets per session. What I would typically do from this point is move on to a completely different delt exercise, and that's what you guys are seeing here. This is the standing cuffed cable lateral raise. I've talked about these a lot. I think that cuffed cable laterals are definitely the best lateral raise exercise that you could possibly do. The standing variation is honestly probably my least favorite variation. I really like the lying and the seated variations, but having a standing variation isn't that bad. It really mimics a more natural motor pattern of a dumbbell lateral or something like that, and it allows the scapulas to move freely. So I really like to do this particular variation on this session, but I would predominantly choose a lying or seated variation on my other ones. The last thing that you'll notice is because this is the last set for my side delts that I am further emphasizing the lengthened position by how much time I am spending in the fully stretched position. After all of the delt work, we're going to get into the tricep work here, and then we're done. So my tricep work is very simple. On both of my push days, I start off with 2 sets of a tricep compound exercise, and then I finish the triceps off with a tricep isolation. So on this particular push rotation, my tricep compound is the Smith JM press. I'm doing 2 sets here. Similar to the hammer strength incline press, I'm doing 2 different rep ranges, one in the higher rep range, say 10 to 15, and then one in the lower 6 to 9. The only difference with my tricep pressing is I actually prefer to do the lighter rep set first, which is what you're seeing here. So this first set was a 13 repper, and then the second set, which you're about to see here, was a 6 repper. And the main reason why I like to do this is I find that the arms, the biceps and triceps, are muscle groups that I would say require a little bit more finesse, or I guess you could describe it as mind-muscle connection. And so I personally find that if I do my lighter set first, that kind of primes my elbows and warms up the tricep muscles to be more effective in the heavier set. I also think it's kind of a safety perspective thing as well. But I have also noticed that my performance is actually better by switching my heavy and light set on my tricep presses. So that's just really something that I thought would be interesting to note. Maybe some of you guys can alter your rep ranges a little bit and maybe be able to further take some more progressions on your tricep compound movements. Finally, the very last exercise that we're going to see is this bilateral overhead tricep extension. Again, this is the last set of my tricep work, so I'm spending a lot of time in the lengthened position, really just toasting those triceps and making sure that they're all burnt out. So by the time that I finish this workout, for all of my muscle groups except for the lats, I have deliberately focused on the shortened position in the range of motion, and I've deliberately focused on the lengthened. And not only have I chosen exercises that further emphasize those points of range of motion with their resistance profiles, but the rep tempos that I'm using and how much time I'm spending in the top and how much time I'm spending in the bottom or the lengthened position is really going to, I would say, maximally stimulate hypertrophy in a lower amount of sets. And really, guys, that's it. Every video clip that you saw today is every single working set from this particular workout. In 6 days, I will do another push rotation with completely different exercises at a completely different gym. But for this particular session, this is really all that gets done. I don't see the point of doing repetitive sets and high volume work when I can stimulate hypertrophy in a shorter amount of sets with higher intensity and then get back in the gym and train the muscle frequently.